along fiery cudgels with which to attack the dragon. The monster then takes refuge in the cool shadow of the Buddha and submits to his spiritual superiority. However, as the Buddha is preparing to return to India, the dragon becomes distraught, just like Uddayana had, and cries, "Why are you leaving me? If I cannot see the Buddha, I will do evil things and suffer an evil reincarnation." The Buddha then compassionately makes it so that his shadow, his reflection, is cast on the walls of the dragon's cave, so that his form can be discerned from far away, although not from close up. Moreover, this shadow continues to teach in the Buddha's absence. Not surprisingly, the continued presence of the Buddha has been traditionally understood at many levels, from the most literal to the most metaphysical, the most metaphorical, or in many cases being both literal and metaphorical, or rather neither literal nor metaphorical, typical Buddhist argument. At the most fundamental level, we see the Buddhist images approach not with aesthetic distance, but with intimacy and devotion, much perhaps as a pious Catholic might appeal to the Virgin Mary for help and guidance, for example. I remember once visiting Dazu, an extraordinary complex of Buddhist images carved in the cliffside of a mountain, sometimes in the 11th century, located in southwest China in Sichuan. Unfortunately, because of its location, it was still in exceptionally good condition. Since I was staying in a hotel not too far away, I made a point to come to the site early in the morning before the rush of tourists and sightseers. I was wandering around taking in all of these beautiful sculptures and reliefs when I heard the plaintive voice of a woman coming from inside one of the caves. I peeped inside quietly and saw what appeared to be a local villager with work-hardened hands and wrinkled brown skin, her hair tied up in a kerchief, addressing a tall 8-foot statue of Avalokiteshvara, or Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Kneeling on the ground and looking up at the image, she poured out her woes. A no-good husband, a spiteful mother-in-law, arthritis in her hands, pain in her back. Whether or not she received any advice, I cannot say, but she looked quite peaceful when she left nearly half an hour later, without having seen the curious Westerner observing her. In other words, for this woman, while the visual and aesthetic experience was by no means absent, it was not her primary goal. What she sought, rather, was a more personal and intimate relationship. Indeed, especially when formally consecrated, Buddhist images were often seen as containers for the Buddha's continued presence in the world. This notion of a living presence helped fill that human need for intimacy with the unseen sacred. We see this intimacy as well in religious rituals such as that of bathing the Buddha on the occasion of his birthday. This ritual is still very popular today in Buddhist communities everywhere, including in this country. In China goes back to at least the 8th century, from which time we had a Mahayana text entitled The Sutra on the Merit of Bathing the Buddha. In this scripture, a bodhisattva by the name of Perfect Wisdom asked the Buddha, "I have not yet discerned what offering living beings will make, or what merit they will cultivate after the death of the Buddha." Again, that concern, what to do after you're gone, so as to bring about those good qualities that quickly lead to final supreme enlightenment. The Buddha's answer addresses many different levels. On the one hand, he refers to the practice of his teachings, the Dharma, the 6 paramitas, the 4 virtues, as the primary means to enlightenment. But he also makes room for more tangible expressions, not only of devotion, but of spiritual practice, including the veneration of relics and texts and offerings of various kinds. Of these, he refers to that of bathing images of himself as one of the most effective. "Noble son," the Buddha is said to have said, "I have already expounded for your sake the 4 noble truths, the 12 conditioned co-productions, and the 6 perfections. Now I teach the method of bathing the image for your sake and the sake of various kings, princes, ministers, concubines, princesses, gods, nagas, humans, and demons." The Buddha then goes on to describe in great detail how this bathing should be done, how to filter the water so as not to cause harm to insects, how to scent it with incense paste, how to heat it and pour it over the Buddha image many times, and then how to dry the image and respectfully put it back on its original location on the altar or in its niche. Noble son, says the Buddha, the consequence of performing this bathing of the Buddha image is that you and the great multitude of men and gods will receive wealth, happiness, and long life without sickness. Your every wish will be fulfilled. You will bid a long farewell to the 8 conditions of trouble and forever escape the font of suffering. And then he adds, and this is why I know it's probably not the Buddha, but you will never again receive the body of a woman and will quickly achieve enlightenment. This ritual, which is still performed today, as I mentioned, in Buddhist communities everywhere, serves both to express devotion to the Buddha and as a form of self-purification. The intimacy and devotion are reflected in the fact that often the statue is a small one, or even the statue of the Buddha as a little child, a cute little child, shortly after his miraculous birth. The spiritual significance is reflected in the ritual instructions provided in the modern Buddhist manual that reads very concisely as follows. Kneel on cushion, fill ladle and pour water over Buddha statue 3 times. While pouring water, say, with the first wash, may I eliminate all evil thoughts. With the second wash, may I cultivate good deeds. And with the third wash, may I help all living sentient beings. In many Buddhist countries, the consecration of a Buddhist image is accompanied by a ritual called opening the eye, in Chinese, kaiguan. Okay? The key moment in this ritual is when the pupils of the eye of the image are dotted, thus allowing the image to see and be seen as embodying the living spirit of the Buddha, or rather, of the Dhammakaya. The Chinese word guan is the same guan as in Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, or Avalokiteshvara, who sees the sounds of suffering beings calling for her help. In Buddhist Chinese, guan has 2 related meanings. The first, again, is to see, in the sense of seeing the physical form of a Buddha or Bodhisattva, whether in the form of a work of art or in the mind, as a visualization. The second is to see into the true nature of oneself and of reality, in other words, insight. They are, of course, intimately related. The process of awakening is one of seeing. To understand is to see and to have insight. But most of us find it very difficult to see if there is nothing there to see. That is, if there are no images, be they physical or mental, artistic or linguistic. It is almost impossible for us to see or understand. Another way of putting it is that without form, we cannot see emptiness. Just without emptiness, we cannot understand form. For Buddhists, the ultimate image is, of course, the Buddha, who represents the one who has seen. However, as Echo puts it, the Buddha's crucial characteristic is not his own seeing, it is his ability to illuminate the minds of others who have not seen. In this sense, vision becomes an exchange, a form of communion, like touching. Seeing Buddha is not just a cool, analytic vision that allows a person to take the structure of reality apart, but also the emotional vision of a beloved object. So it's both and, not either or. In other words, like the shadow on the dragon's cave and Udayana sandalwood image, they are the multiplicity of forms that are compassionately, skillfully designed to illuminate, evoke, or express that which is beyond form. In other words, Buddhist images are metaphors, or to use the popular Zen analogy, fingers pointing to the moon. Perhaps the most vivid illustration of this notion is the Tibetan mandala, with its often extraordinarily intricate kaleidoscope of shapes, symbols, colors, and forms. As many of you probably know, the mandala is designed as an aid to visualization. A practitioner first studies closely the visual representation of palaces and deities, and then recreates them, or rather brings them alive in his own mind. He or she then seeks not only intimacy, but actual union, identification with the deity that resides at the heart of everything. Or rather, he realizes the Buddha nature that resides at the heart of everything, whether deity, demon, or ordinary human being. But it does not end there. Once this union is accomplished, the visualization is dissolved. the images return to emptiness. Many of you have no doubt seen the creation of a sun mandala. The monks have come several times, I think, to the St. Louis Art Museum. A long, painstaking process that culminates in often stunningly beautiful images, which, however, are not set in place with glue and covered with glass and hung on the wall, but rather swept away and destroyed or tossed into the river the merit offered to all living beings. This dynamic interplay between form and emptiness, between relative and ultimate truth, is also illustrated by a popular Zen story that many of you probably have heard. The story features the Zen master Dansha, who one cold winter evening is informed that the monastery has run out of wood for the stove. He then begins to take down the wooden Buddhist images from the altar and stoke them into the fire. His monks are horrified when they see this, and they accuse him of being disrespectful to the Buddha. Dansha then asks his monks an important question. Are these images alive? Do they possess Buddha nature? The monks, being good Zen monks, admit that no. They are just statues made of wood, and so cannot be said to have Buddha nature. However, the following day, when the weather has cleared up, Dansha goes to town to buy some replacement Buddha images. He sets them up on the altar, and burning incense begins to bow to them in reverence. Really confused now, his monks ask him if what he is worshipping is in fact firewood. Not at all, said Dansha. These images are sacred, and by bowing in front of them, I am honoring the Buddha. We find a modern reiteration of this seeming paradox in the teaching story of Korean master Chin-Shun, and this is in his book called Dropping Ashes on the Buddha. And the story goes, somebody comes into the Zen center with a lighted cigarette. This must be a couple years ago, before people didn't smoke anymore. Walks up to the Buddha statue, blows smoke in its face, and drops ashes on its lap. You are standing there. This is Master Chin-Shun speaking. What can you do? This person has understood that nothing is holy or unholy. All things in the universe are one, and that one is himself. So everything is permitted. Ashes are Buddha, Buddha are ashes. The cigarette flicks, the ashes drop. But, the Master says, his understanding is only partial. He has not yet understood that all things are just as they are. Holy is holy, unholy is unholy. Ashes are ashes, Buddha is Buddha. He is very attached to emptiness and to his own understanding, and he thinks that all words are useless. So whatever you say to him, whatever you try to teach him, he will hit you. If you try to teach by hitting him back, he will hit you even harder. He is very strong. How can you cure his delusion? Since you are a Zen student, you are also a Zen teacher. You are walking on the path of the Bodhisattva, whose vow is to save all beings from their suffering. This person is suffering from a mistaken view. You must help him understand the truth, that all things in the universe are just as they are. How can you do this? If you find the answer to this problem, you will find the true way. So I was channeling Master Chin-Shun. Now I'm back to myself. I do not have the answer to this question. But surely it has something to do with clinging to notions of either emptiness or form, of the Buddha image as a piece of firewood or an ashtray, or the Buddha as a sacred art object worthy of respect and attention. The idea of Buddhist images as foci for intimacy and devotion, or even as firewood, may of course make perfect sense to a Buddhist follower or to someone raised in a Buddhist culture. But what about someone who is not a Buddhist? Do these images have anything to say to this person beyond the purely artistic or aesthetic? I dare say they most certainly do, although the nature of that response may differ greatly from person to person. I would like to end by talking about two such responses, one by an early 20th century English poet and literary critic, and one by a late 20th century Catholic monk. The literary critic is William Emerson, author of a book of literary criticism entitled 7 Types of Ambiguity. Emerson, who lived for many years in Japan, was fascinated by Buddhist images. In fact, he wrote a long study of Buddhist images called Faces of the Buddha, which unfortunately was never published and has been lost, as far as I know. In 1933, Epson wrote in a letter to a friend that Buddhist art was the only accessible art I found myself able to care about. For Epson, the face of the Buddha in many ways embodied the notion of ambiguity that he had written extensively about in his scholarly work. For him, the Buddha's face combined seemingly incompatible elements of repose and active power in a startling and compelling unity. Wisdom and compassion, quiescence and activity. He writes, and he's talking here about the great big Buddha at Kamakura, this big sort of towering, monumental Buddha. He writes, "The drooping eyelids of the great creature is heavy with patience and suffering, and the subtle irony which offends us in their raised eyebrows is in effect an appeal to us to feel, as they do, that it is odd we let our desires subject us to so much torment in the world. The first thing to say about the Buddha face is that the smile of superiority can mean and be felt to mean simply the power to help. The face is at once blind and all-seeing, so at once sufficient to itself and of universal charity." What stands out to me in this passage is the phrase, "How odd that we let our desires subject us to so much torment in the world." Odd, especially to those of us more accustomed, as many Westerners are, to thinking in terms of constantly doing and becoming more, of defining our personality, our individuality, that which makes us different, makes us unique, that which allows us to succeed. As a scholar of Epson writing, not a Buddhist as far as I know, puts it very eloquently, better than I could. He says, "The Buddha seems to be urging us to drop our pretense to know heights and depths, to become flat and quiet, of equal mind, while others dig and build, decline and rise around the clock without repose, until they have emotions, thoughts, beliefs, a point of view that they can call their own." The Buddha urges his followers to regard feelings and sensations, notions and beliefs, meteorologically, as if like kinds of weather, passing through, belonging to no one. Most of us want, of course, to stake a claim. Those claims are shrill, unconducive to repose, and their tendency is escalation. This behavior, here I'm quoting this author again, suggests an evocative metaphor used by T.S. Eliot, who once wrote, "Ultimate reality haunts us like the prayers of childhood. As in a dark room at night, when our day of claiming has turned to disquiet, we reach out for someone we can trust to say, 'Shh.'" So are these Buddhist images around us all saying, "Shh"? Certainly, that is how one feels when entering this museum, where viewers are asked to observe respectful conduct and to pay close, contemplative visual attention to the images they encounter there. But this shh does not mean that one should quiet one's mind and go to sleep, which the analogy to the child crying for its mother at the end of the day evokes. Rather, it points to a need to quiet the mind in order to wake up, in order to pay attention, in order to see things as they really are. It is a call to still the mind waves on the pond so that it can better serve to mirror, so their depths can better serve to mirror and reflect our own true nature, our Buddha nature. Ultimately, what we'll need to know how to do is how to quiet the mind and stay awake even in the chaos and noise of the marketplace and the mall and the halls of the university. However, the generous spaciousness of this building and of the placement of these exquisite Buddhist images can provide a space that is much like a meditation retreat, a protected space, as it were, in which to slow down and to observe, to pay attention. In so doing, it provides us with an opportunity to engage in a different way of seeing, a seeing rooted in wisdom rather than ignorance, confidence rather than fear, attention rather than distraction. Seeing the Buddha in a multiplicity of forms from a variety of different cultures invites us to see or to intuit what lies beyond form, and even beyond such labels as Chinese, Tibetan, Indian, or even Buddhist. It invites us, if only momentarily, to see the world and ourselves as the Buddha might see it, that is, just as they are. I would like to close with the words of someone else who is neither Asian nor Buddhist,